What if the most frightening song ever written about the passing of time? The piece that has made millions of people freeze where they sit and quietly take stock of their own lives. The track on Dark Side of the Moon that listeners reach for when they want to describe the specific terror of realizing the years have slipped away without permission, opened with a sound that was never meant to be on the album at all, and was written in its devastating wisdom about wasted decades by a man who had not yet turned 30. Both of those things are true. And together, they make Time one of the strangest masterpieces in the catalog. A song where the most famous element was an accident, and the most profound element was a kind of prophecy, delivered by someone far too young to have earned it. This is the story of how a test recording became the most famous alarm clock in music, and of how a man in his 20s managed to write the definitive lament for a life half-wasted, years before he could possibly have wasted it. Start with the clocks, because the clocks are the part everyone knows and almost nobody understands. When time begins, before a single note of the song proper, there is that overwhelming eruption of ticking and chiming and ringing, a whole room full of clocks going off at once, an explosion of mechanical time that is one of the most recognizable openings in all of recorded music. It feels so perfectly designed, so exactly suited to a song about time devouring your life, that you assume it was composed for exactly that purpose, built deliberately as the gateway to the track. It was not. The engineer, Alan Parsons, who worked on Dark Side of the Moon, had made that recording for an entirely different reason. Before the album was even properly underway, he was experimenting with quadraphonic sound, the 4-speaker technology the band was fascinated by, and he wanted material to demonstrate what it could do. So he took a portable tape machine to an antique clock shop near the studio, asked the owner to stop all the other clocks, and recorded each one separately, one clock at a time, building up a library of individual ticks and chimes that he later assembled at Abbey Road. It was a technical exercise. It was a demonstration reel for a sound system. It was never intended to be the doorway into a meditation on mortality. And then it became exactly that, because the band heard it and recognized what they had, a sound that fit a song about time so perfectly that its accidental origin became invisible. The clocks were lifted out of their original purpose as a stereo gimmick and dropped into the opening of time, where they detonate like an alarm going off inside your chest. There is even a lineage to it, a sense that the band had been circling this idea for years, because clocks winding and chiming had appeared on Pink Floyd records as far back as their very first album in 1967, on the closing moments of a Syd Barrett song, an idea that lay dormant for 5 years before being resurrected in its most famous form. So the most iconic sound on one of the most iconic songs of all time was not a stroke of compositional genius aimed at the track. It was a happy accident that wandered in from a sound test and found, by luck, the one place in all of music where it was supposed to be. Now turn to the song the clocks announce, because the accident at the front is only half the strangeness. Once the chiming stops, time unfolds into one of the most quietly devastating lyrics in popular music. A meditation on the way life slips past while you are waiting for it to begin. The way you fritter away the hours of the day in idle ways. The way you suddenly look up and discover that years have got behind you, that the sun you thought you had endless mornings of is sinking, that you are running and runnings, only to find yourself one day older and one day nearer the end. It is a song about the panic of the middle of life, the moment a person realizes that the future they were always saving themselves for has quietly become the past. That the race cannot be won because the track itself is running out. Gilmore delivers it with an aggressive, almost angry vocal, and the band sped the song up from the slower version they had played live, so that the music itself seems to be accelerating away from you, refusing to let you rest, exactly like the thing it describes, played at full volume. In the dark. It is one of the most effective pieces of music ever made for making a person feel the weight of their own mortality. And here is the fact that should stop you cold, the inversion that makes time genuinely uncanny. The man who wrote those words, Roger Waters, was not an old man looking back over a long life of regret. He was not even middle-aged. He was born in 1943, and the album was released in 1973, which means he wrote this definitive lament about decades slipping away, this perfect anatomy of the regret of a life half spent when he had not yet turned 30. A man of 28 or 29 sat down and wrote the truest warning ever set to music about the horror of waking up old and realizing you wasted your one life. At an age when, by any ordinary reckoning, he had wasted almost nothing yet. He had decades ahead of him. He had barely begun, and somehow he saw the whole trap from the outside, before the door had even closed, and described it so precisely that people 3 times his age would hear it and feel that someone had read their entire lives back to them. How is that possible? It is possible because the real subject of time is not old age at all. It is the moment of recognition, and that moment can arrive at any age. What Waters understood, young, was something that most people only feel much later. That life is not a rehearsal for some real life that begins later, that the waiting itself is the life, that the time you spend assuming the important part has not started yet is the important part, and it is passing. He did not need to be old to know this. He needed only to look up once and notice that the days were going by while he assumed they did not count, and to be honest enough not to look away from what that meant. The terror of time is not the terror of the elderly. It is the terror of the young person who suddenly realizes, with no way to unrealize it, that the clock has been running the whole time, that it started without telling them, and that there is no point at which life politely begins. The song is a warning sent backward from a future the writer had not yet reached, and that is exactly why it lands so hard. It was written by someone standing at the start of the maze who could already see the whole shape of it, and chose to tell us. So what does time actually leave us with, underneath the clocks and the famous dread? It leaves us with a doubled accident that became a doubled truth. The sound that opens it was never meant for it. A test recording of antique clocks that found its way onto the album by luck. And the wisdom that fills it was premature, written by a man too young to have lived it, who somehow saw it anyway. And those two unlikely things, the accidental alarm and the early prophecy, fused into the single most effective reminder of mortality that popular music has ever produced. There is something fitting in that. A song about how time arrives before you are ready for it was itself assembled out of things that arrived before they were supposed to. A clock recording made for the wrong reason and a wisdom that came too soon. The whole thing is a kind of demonstration of its own theme. Nobody planned it. It simply happened, the way the years happen, while everyone was busy doing something else. So the next time time goes off, that great clattering eruption of clocks, and then the long, slow dread of the song itself. Listen to it as the strange and accidental masterpiece it is. The alarm that wakes you was a sound test. The voice warning you that your life is running out belonged to a man who had barely started his own, and the reason it still stops people cold 50 years later is that both the accident and the prophecy turned out to be true. The clocks were never meant to be there, and they are perfect. The man was too young to know, and he knew anyway. And the warning he sent has been arriving, right on time, for every listener who was certain the important part of their life had not started yet. If you want the rest of these stories, the accidents and the buried truths behind the songs everyone thinks they already know, that whole secret history runs through my Pink Floyd dossier, and the link is waiting in the pinned comment. But the heart of this one is a clock that wandered onto an album and a young man who saw the end from the beginning. So I will leave you the question time has been asking, on schedule, for half a century. If a man not yet 30 could already see the whole shape of a wasted life, clearly enough to write the definitive warning about it, what does that say about how early the truth is available to us? And why do almost all of us insist on learning it too late? Where art does not console, it autopsies.